So I kind of realized as I was standing there, yeah, she was out in front here. I might have to move out because I kind of feel further back up on the stage and these bright lights and everything. And for me, this is kind of nerve-wracking. I feel more comfortable like out climbing a mountain usually as opposed to being like in an audience here. But I'll just have to get through this, I guess, right? So anyway, climb your Everest is kind of my thought, and she hit it right on the head, is stepping outside your comfort zone. And for me, my whole life is kind of, I guess you could say at times, lived on the edge. One of my favorite sayings is, in order to be successful in life, you have to accept and embrace being uncomfortable on some level in order to push forward and achieve. And speaking of uncomfortable, I've got all these bright lights in my eyes. I've got an audience I've never met before. I'm in the middle of Flatland, Minnesota, and I'm really nervous. So this is just the worst. I don't know how I'm going to handle this. Maybe the best thing I can do to handle this is, well, make sure my computer's working right, but maybe I'm good at playing these videos so we can break the ice, and this will give you a little bit of idea of the types of things I've been doing over the past couple of years.
It all started June 2011, 14,337 feet in the sky at the summit of La Plata Peak.
Chris has got his tent set up right here, and I got mine set up probably right about as high as I can get, right on the summit.
Over the next 95 days, Dr. Jon Kedrowski would set up camp atop every Colorado 14er, something that's never been done before, and for good reason.
Well, what we did defied all logic.
Our own Chris Tomer knows how dangerous it is to climb Colorado peaks in the afternoon and spend the night up there. Lightning is always a threat. And there was a scare here atop Mount Harvard when Kedrowski felt electric charges and ran for cover seconds before lightning struck near his tent.
Yeah, I was definitely scared to death and thought that was it for me, that it was going to strike, hit me, and I'd maybe get knocked out. But fortunately, I kind of got out of the way in the nick of time.
Researching their new book, Sleeping on the Summits, helped them accomplish a couple of goals. For Tomer, it was to learn more about Colorado's challenging high-altitude weather patterns.
Mountain weather, largely misunderstood as it is.
25,900 feet.
And Kedrowski did it in part to acclimate his body for his biggest challenge yet, conquering this mountain, Mount Everest, which he did just a month and a half ago.
This is 58.
But even Everest has to compete with the feeling of accomplishment Kedrowski got last September when he finally made history.
There's nowhere else to go. I can't believe it, I did it.
Summiting and spending the night on Mount of the Holy Cross, 14,009 feet in the sky, the first person to ever sleep atop all of Colorado's highest mountains.
58 peaks in about 90 days. Most unbelievable journey of my entire life.
Or so I thought, right? And now, raise your hand if you've accomplished something that you thought was pretty awesome, but then it just kept getting better, right? Something else was on the horizon. Or for me, I stand up on the top of these mountains and I see the next mountains that I'm going to climb, the next goal that I'm going to climb. A lot of people say that the things I do are somewhat dangerous, I guess. My mom is always worried about me. But I can promise you, well, who drove here today? Raise your hand if you drove to get to work today. I think your commute was more dangerous than what I do on a daily basis. I'm pretty sure. Now, have you all ever been in the middle of a tough climb in your life? Maybe on ropes, scared that you could fall? We've all probably been there. We all set our own goals, I assume, in order for you to get to where you're going. Personal, professional, family-oriented. Sometimes you may feel like you're unroped, and it's really uncomfortable. Now, when you look at a photo like this is a shot from a mountain I climbed last year in Pakistan. Has anyone ever been to Pakistan before? That right there, you're probably like, what in the world are you doing going over there? But even when you look at this mountain, do any of you look at it with kind of a desire to go up that mountain? Does it draw your attention? For me, it really does, and I even feel like, going across that little ridge to the left side might be a little bit scary. Do some of these words come to mind? Maybe at first a hesitation, a fear of something, fear of the unknown. Of course, it's dangerous. You don't want to go there. I just put some other words up here: wonder, motivation, dreams. You might think about that journey going up that mountain. If you don't go, you're missing out on opportunity or other chances to get even better views through this journey. And then, of course, there's goals you can set to get there. You know, for us, it was like, well, I want to climb to the top of that mountain, but I'm not just going to go all the way up. I've got to set short-term goals and maybe put a camp in on the ridge, a little bit further up, put a second camp in, take some food and supplies up there, climb back down, and then go back up again. And, you know, through all those challenges, eventually you're going to persevere. Maybe the weather's going to get good enough to go to the top. But I've kind of looked at my life through the lenses of mountains like this my whole entire life. Even as a young kid, I grew up in Vail, Colorado, went to a small elementary school across from the ski hill. In this photo, there are actually two other people in this photo that turned out to be Olympians and that I went to school with. Also, you might be able to pick me out in here, and I'll show you in just a minute. But I felt like I had a calling at an early age to be different than everybody else, to do something that was a little bit outside the box. And it took basically getting busted by the cops on the golf course from shooting water balloons at golfers and getting taken to the cop office to figure out maybe a little bit more about what my calling was. So we'd run around in the woods, we'd shoot water balloons at golfers, we'd hide in these forts overlooking the golf course. One time the cops had a beat on us and they caught us. And as punishment, my mom and dad, they made us stay in the cop precinct overnight. They told the cops to keep us there. And then in the morning when we were basically scared to death and we almost died from eating TV dinners there that night that they provided, they got us and they took us home, and my mom said, why don't you guys just go hike some of the smaller mountains and hills up behind the home and stay away from the golf course. So me and a couple of friends went up and we ended up climbing way back in this wilderness area. We went camping one night, we set a big fire and we camped and roasted marshmallows, and then we hiked further up and we went to the top of this peak called Ptarmigan. And from there you could see all the Colorado mountains laid out in front of us, and I was like an 11-year-old kid. And when I got to the top and saw those mountains, of course in grade school everyone learns what's the highest mountain in the world, Everest. And I learned what that was, and I thought, well shoot, all these mountains are amazing, I want to climb those. But even at 11, 12 years old, I said, I'm going to climb Mount Everest someday. And there's me sitting in second grade, and that's what I said to my classmates, and they all were like, you can't do that. No, no one ever climbs Everest. Who goes to Everest? That's crazy. And so I was already hearing naysayers. I'm sure you guys have been there, right? People, you've had goals, dreams, ideas of things you wanted to do, and maybe some people have told you it couldn't be done. I've heard that all along. My formula for success was pretty simple. It was education and academics led to athletics and opportunities after that. So I went on and got my master's, my PhD, things like that. I went on to climb now 5 of the 7 continental summits. You know, I try to stay away from words on slides because I know you guys hate that stuff with PowerPoints, but choose to set your goals high has always been my mantra, my personal feeling on things. And there's always going to be people along the way that just say it can't be done. So surround yourself with teammates, friends, coworkers, colleagues that believe in you and what you're doing, because that's the most important thing, and that's going to lead to further success. And of course, I'm sure even here in this environment, you've met coworkers, great friends, and there's a reason that you're here doing what you're doing. And so you have to have those people around you, the best people around you, to move forward. And for those of you, has anyone in this room been to Colorado? Maybe on a ski trip? Have you ever heard of the 14ers? They're peaks that are over 14,000 feet in the state, and there's actually 58 of these peaks. And so this map might be a little bit hard to see, but it outlines that there's 6 major mountain ranges in the state. And so I grew up climbing these mountains because, as you can tell up here on the stage, I'm a short white guy and I wanted to play basketball at the college level. So I had to do something to, I guess, give me a little bit of an edge when I got back to school in the fall, whether it was for my football seasons or basketball in high school, but then playing at the college level was even tougher. And so I used the peaks as training. I'd be out climbing them all summer long, getting really good cardio fitness, challenging myself, putting myself basically outside my comfort zone. So when I got back to running sprints during the football season, or if I was running sprints in the basketball season, I was really fit and I was able to compete. You know, because here's an old shot of me playing at Valparaiso University. As you can see, a skinny, short, small, white kid on a Division I basketball team. But training in the summers gave me an edge when I got back. And that's really how I got started in mountaineering. And this book that you see, I got a few copies up here. We're going to give away one here at the end. But the Colorado 14ers High Bivvies project was an opportunity that I had in 2011. My back was somewhat against the wall. I was a college professor, and I got done with my first year teaching at Central Washington University. And I basically got fired from my job. I got laid off. So I got home in the summertime, and I called my friend Chris, and I said, well, hey, man, I'm going to go do this project, and I think you could probably fit a tent on every single summit. Some of these summits are the size of this stage. Some of these summits are even smaller. But I had climbed all the peaks in the past, so I knew that you could at least, maybe fit a tent up there, maybe not. And he just kind of said to me, well, I'll come with you on some of these, but you're just downright crazy. And you can see here, this is Crestone Peak, just a small little summit on the top. But the reason I did this as well was to get the photography, to get the views, to be up on the mountains in the solitude when there was nobody up there. Oh, and this gives me kind of a segue. I know you guys are probably into this social media thing, so if you want to tag me on Twitter or on Facebook and all that good stuff, you can do that too. I know that we live in this day and age where we do these things. But the book came out a couple years ago, Sleeping on the Summits, and it's a great kind of combination of teamwork and the views up there and the adversity that I faced on the mountains. Because again, I didn't know that I would have a job the second year. I didn't know what the future held. All I knew is that I could control only what I could control, and that was going out and climbing these mountains every day and shooting the photography, and I was optimistically positive. I basically had a positive attitude, another thing that I call a positude, and I took that with me every day, knowing that I could be successful, climb these mountains, shoot the photography, and other opportunities in my life would open up. And I think if we live that way every day, there's one thing you can control, and that's always your attitude. Now, the title, Colorado 14er High Bivvies, bivouac means a long night of suffering. Now, why do we as humans subject ourselves to suffering? Usually it's for some sort of gain, right? There's a reason why we put ourselves through hell, whether it's working long hours, going to maybe get more education. Those of you that run marathons could probably relate to that. You push yourself through training-wise as well. But you can see there's a smile on my face on this peak. There was no wind up there that night. It was beautiful. The stars ended up coming out, and I just really enjoyed myself on this summit. So I can assure you that suffering is just short term. It's never that long term of suffering. So if you push yourself through something, more often than not, you're going to make it through. And I failed time and time again. 58 peaks. I actually climbed 73 peaks because 15 times I'd get to the top and there would be a storm coming or something, or I couldn't get my tent up because it was too windy. And I had to turn around and go back down to my car at the trailhead. I couldn't stay up there. And every time I felt that, pain of being defeated when I was up there, this was a project that went for 95 days. And of course, in the earlier video, you saw my good friend Chris. He came on some of these peaks, but he had the real job, so he couldn't come all the time. I was out there on my own. But I learned about these peaks over the years. I'd say, okay, well, on this one I'm going up, let's say La Plata Peak, and I need to know, what the weather's coming from which direction. And he would send me text messages about weather, what was happening, like if a storm was coming from a certain direction. And that helped me out a lot because I could call him on the phone and say, well, hey, I see this storm over Aspen, and it's coming towards me. It looks like it's going to miss me. What do you think? And he'd say, yeah, you probably should get off the summit, or you can stay up there because it's going to go right by you. And so I'd watch these storms go by at eye level and the lightning come out of the clouds, and it was just an amazing experience. But point being is, find a handful of friends or people you can trust in your lives and rely upon them to get you through the hard times. And as I journeyed through these peaks, because I'm going to take you to Everest here in just a minute, this was also training for Mount Everest. 95 days, and I'll talk about Everest being a 60-day expedition. So this trip for me was longer and more difficult. So often we suffer through preparation for some bigger goal because that prepares us for that bigger goal. And this was exactly what I needed. This was the top of Mount Eolas where I was able to spend the night in light winds. Mount Wilson is another peak near Telluride, Colorado. Some of these had just impressive perches. I would put it's tough to kind of see these rocks here, but I'd put rocks along the side of the tent, and that would remind me not to go that way at night if I had to go to the bathroom, because you drop right off the cliff. And Chris would work the morning show for like 3, 4, 5 days in a row, and I'd be on the peaks 3, 4, 5 days in a row. So then he'd show up with like a burrito and from Qdoba, and he'd say, hey man, keep pushing yourself, and encouraged me because I was just exhausted after like 4 or 5 nights in a row on these peaks. So he encouraged me. And just some of the views were impressive. These are the Maroon Bells by Aspen. Beautiful reflection off the water and an even more interesting summit. You can see that the goal was to get the tent as high as we could get it, and that was accomplished on this particular instance. And it wasn't all about being on the top, and it wasn't always about making it to the summit. Like I said, I failed a bunch, and one time I got down to my vehicle and there were paw prints on the hood, and my window had been broken, and the bear crawled right into my passenger side window. Bite marks in the cooler, meat strewn all over the interior, peanut butter pretzels from Costco strewn all over the inside, a trail of gummy bears leading into the woods, and a big container of 6 pounds of whey protein completely missing, not even a wrapper to be found. And the worst thing about this peak going back up is that I had to go back up there. So you can imagine me being worried about finding a bear all hopped up on whey protein in the woods waiting for me. And I was fearful, and Chris said, hey, don't worry about it. Just tape up your window. This was like Tuesday. He said, there's 2 other peaks nearby. Go climb those, spend the night on them, do your thing. I'll come down on Friday. Order us some pizza because we won't need to carry a stove. We'll just carry our water filters and we'll take pizza to the summit and eat it for dinner. And then, so we got to the trailhead. I met him. And I opened up his backpack and I pulled it out of his truck and it was a little bit heavy. I'm just like, what in the world? I said, we got to go fast and light. I told you, fast and light. And I pulled out his gun. And I was like, what in the world are you bringing this gun for? And he's like, hey, we're going to take care of this bear. Don't you worry. But, we ended up hiking up to the top and getting a beautiful sunset. Storms were moving off to the east, so we didn't have to worry about those. We never saw the bear, but we did see that beautiful sunset. And on the 3rd try, we made it on top of Little Bear. The 2 challenges for me was Little Bear and a peak like Capitol Peak, which is really challenging up there as well. And, for me, the entire project of sleeping on the summits was, like I said, it always acclimated me for going to other places because our mountains on other parts of the world are much higher than the mountains we have in the United States. And I always strive for things that have never been done before, especially with my own projects. But we can all take something from this, the fact that you're going through your own journeys, personal, professional. Some of you may be trying to start families. You may be going to school to get an extra degree. You may be trying to face some tough challenge at work or do new things. And these are all things that you on a personal level have never done before. And so the more pride and the more belief in yourself that you take for this, the better off you're going to be and the more than likely you're going to accomplish that. And for me, it was getting through that Bivvies project because I had this even bigger challenge ahead of me. The highest mountain in the world, Mount Everest over in Nepal. And I hang my goals up. I don't know about you, but if I have them out visible in front of me, then I work towards doing them every single day. I do something like a task or make a phone call or you write a paper, or for me, with my mountaineering career, it was write research grants, contact sponsors, go out and train more. And so in about 2008, I took a picture similar to this and I hung it up above my bed. And honestly, I just got sick and tired of looking at it because every single day it would kind of eat at me. Like in May every year, and I'll get into the Everest journey here now, but Everest is a 60-day trip. And every single spring in May is the best time to climb the summit. This mountain is so high, the next time you're in an airplane, look out the window, you're probably at a cruising altitude of 29,000, 30,000 feet. That's how high Mount Everest is. And so in every May is the best time to climb it because the winds die down off the summit. And so, yeah, I hang up my goals and you leave in April. And every year in April, I would get irked by hearing about either friends or people in the climbing community leaving to go to Everest because I wasn't going. And finally, by 2012, I had organized a small group, but as well as got invited to go on an expedition to Everest. And yeah, sometimes in life, there are a lot of obstacles. But in particular, when you look at this, it might be tough to see, but base camp and Camp 1, you have this area known as the Khumbu Icefall. And now you may have heard this season was a really big tragedy that happened in the icefall, like 16 climbers died. It was because one of the ice chunks, similar to this, but it was actually up on the side wall of the valley, fell on a bunch of the climbers and basically wiped them out. It was kind of like Jenga on these icicles. These are called seracs. This one is about the size of a 5-story building. And they start melting as the sun hits them. So you climb through the ice fall in the early morning hours if you can, and you wear these crampons on your feet, these spikes that help you grip the ice and snow. And you have boots that go down to 40 below zero to keep your toes from freezing so you don't get frostbite. And it's quite of a chilling experience, but you may have times in your life where you've got these crevasses you've got to cross. Sometimes you may feel like you're going against adversity, facing things that you can't see the bottom, or it's a really rickety bridge you got to cross. Here you can't see the bottom at all. And there's often spans that go on forever, and you get to them and you think, man, I'm really going to cross that thing? And you know, sometimes you just have to believe in yourself and your abilities and realize that everything's going to be all right. And I'm sure you all are probably intrigued by maybe wanting to see what it's like to cross one of these. So let's cross one. I don't know what happened to our audio, but oh, there we go.
What do you think? Do you think I'm good?
And actually, it's kind of funny. I have to mute it for obvious reasons. I was a little bit scared going across this ladder, and I said a few choice words. And but you can see here now, we do put ropes across the span. The ladder goes down. It's kind of tied in. One of your climbing friends or teammates will hold onto the rope, so it acts as kind of like a handrail. You can hold onto it as well to steady yourself. And then you have to kind of put your feet in these rungs of the ladder, kind of bit by bit. You can see it was kind of shaky. But what's comforting about this crevasse is that you can see the bottom, you know, so you can actually see where some of them it's black. And you'd probably fall basically through the earth back here to Minnesota or something. And I was concerned, and I was saying a few choice words because I was catching my heel on the rungs of the ladder because my feet are a little bit bigger. And as I would like pull my heel up, the teeth of the crampon would catch. And so that was making me nervous, and the girls were laughing at me. They're like, come on, you can make it across this thing. And you know, how many of you have crossed a crevasse in life where maybe halfway across you realize, oh, this isn't that bad, right? And I kind of felt the same way. You get across some sort of a fear you have, and you face that fear, and then you know, you look back upon the experience and you realize it wasn't that bad. And that's kind of the way it feels crossing these crevasses. And you know, I go through this ice fall, and on an Everest expedition you go through the ice fall time and time again, 3 or 4 times, and every time you go through it you realize that those crossings get easier and easier, and you get a little bit desensitized to it. And that's kind of what happened for me. This gives you a better perspective of just what those crossings look like and how the ropes help you steady yourself when you go across. But climbing your Everest is easier said than done. This is a shot from the top, 60-day expedition. You know, sometimes you set out to do something great and you really just vision the end result. And for me, I envisioned that end result, but then I had to step back a little bit and realize that there's a longer journey of steps I need to take to get there. You know, and but all great dreams have to start somewhere. Again, it was back doing my mountains back home. That was something that gave me a lot of confidence. Preparation over and over again. For me, it also was going to college. It was getting an education. It was putting myself in the position to deserve going to Everest, to deserve the summit. And I never assumed I knew everything along my journey. And I think if you always never assume you know it all, every single day you can learn something new. And the people that you meet and come in contact with, the journeys that you have on your own, those are all going to add up to your great goals and your great summits. You know, and so I kind of mentioned you in your position. There's a lot of different positions here as members of the Minnesota Timberwolves family and organization. You guys probably come across people you work with every day that you're giving them their dream, or you're working with somebody to accomplish their goals. But it's all got to start somewhere, and it's all got to start with that positive attitude, the positude, and the vision of that summit. You know, going back to the vision that I always had was a shot like this, up on the top of the highest mountain in the world. But again, it's easier said than done. Again, it's not the mountain we conquer, it's ourselves. Because for me, on a lot of these projects, if I don't believe in myself, I'm not even going to make it out the door. I'm not even going to be able to drive to the trailhead that I'm going to. And I'm definitely not going to get on the plane and fly 14 hours overseas to Nepal. One of my favorite sayings is, in order to be successful in life, you have to do something very outrageous so that you get noticed, so that you carve your path. Because let's face it, it's a competitive world out there. So when I was the person to have the highest Tebow in the world at the time, I really was, a lot of people were envious of me. And there are no shortcuts to any place worth going. I really wish that they had a helicopter to take me to the summit of Everest, but it doesn't work that way. In fact, if they take you to the summit of Everest in a helicopter, if they were able to, and drop you on the summit, you would be dead in 3 minutes. That's because there's 30% of the amount of oxygen on the summit of Everest. And it's just like training for a marathon or any other physical activity. You can climb up and down this mountain and your body will adjust to the lack of oxygen. It's called acclimatization. By us putting 4 camps in on this mountain, you basically let your body produce red blood cells and adjust to the lack of oxygen. And then that allows you to eventually make it up to the top to where you can survive up there. So training, practice, deliberate practice is what works on this mountain. And it's a long journey. We trek in the distance. You see Mount Everest when you're about 7 days away from the mountain while you're hiking to the peak. And you look at that mountain and you say to yourself, wow, I'm really going to stand on top of that thing. And in the center of this photo, you could see that pyramid sticking up. And I mentioned before, Everest pierces the jet stream. So for 50 weeks out of the year, it's 200-mile-per-hour winds up there. You cannot go up. But some reason in May, for about 2 weeks, you get a period of time where the winds die below 40 miles per hour, and you can safely make it on top. But instead of worrying about that big goal, we were able to enjoy other scenery along our trek. And we set goals. And even my other favorite saying, first ask yourself what you want, then you have to do it. You know, you have to hold yourself accountable on a personal level. Your friends may also hold yourselves accountable. But on a personal level, I think we're all our own worst critic and our own boss, basically, that holds us accountable for these goals. And there's a great shot looking at that summit pyramid. Again, the jet stream in early April pierces that summit. We trek in for about 7-8 days, slowly going higher and higher, getting closer and closer to just the base camp at 17,000 feet. But instead of worrying about that great goal of standing on the summit, because again, it's about the journey. You're going to stand on this summit for maybe an hour. You're on this trip for 60 days. So you might as well just enjoy it. So we set short-term goals. Some of our short-term goals is just to get to the bakery and have a brew or have some coffee in the coffee shop and then continue on to the next village. Whereas then the long-term goals were set before us by getting to base camp, setting camps up the mountain, getting to our summit day, all those types of things. So a step-by-step process. And as we were hiking through these beautiful villages, getting closer and closer, enjoying the journey, the view got closer, and we realized we were arriving at base camp, which was that much more close to our summit and our summit bid eventually. I also call base camp Disneyland, because when you climb Mount Everest, it's the highest mountain in the world, there's lots of people there. About 900 people set out every year with a dream to go to Everest and climb it. They trek in. Maybe you lose between 50 and 100 people on the trek because they get sick or they realize it's not for them. Then when you start climbing, a series of acclimatization, which is the base camp is in the lower corner of the picture, and of course you go up the valley, up the ice fall, and then this map just briefly shows that we put 4 camps in as we go up the mountain. And these 4 camps go up in altitude up to 20,000 feet in Camp 1, 22,000 feet in the second camp. The Lhotse Face, which is the feature right in the center, is a 24,000 foot camp of Camp 3. And we spend 3 weeks taking tents up, equipment, food and gear, and putting them in these camps, spending the night in those camps, then coming back to base camp and resting. And this whole time, the acclimatization process occurs where your body gets red blood cells so that you can breathe easier. Every time you come down to base camp and rest for a few days in between, your body adjusts to the altitude. And so it's you feel better, and you also feel like you're starting to accomplish your goal. And another great close-up, because covering up from the sun is also really important. I kind of equate base camp to a beautiful January day here in Minneapolis, where you guys have these beautiful winter days, right? Where it's really warm. Okay, no, wait, am I in the wrong place? I'm sorry. No, you guys do though. I think you have sunny days here, where the sun gets kind of intense, and but it's chilly. So maybe here, for example, this was in 17,000 feet in base camp, 50% of the amount of oxygen you have at sea level, and it was like 25 degrees for a high in April. And it was sunny though, so the sun warmed you up, so it wasn't so bad. But we cover up so you don't get sunburned, things like that. And again, a great view of just the equipment that you wear on a typical day. We have to pass through the ice fall. And eventually we get through that acclimatization process. From about April 17th to about May 10th, we do this process. And then eventually we get a chance to go to the summit. And that's by climbing above the third camp. And this is a shot climbing above the third camp. And you can see basically that there are a lot of people higher up on the mountain, or I saw that day that there were. And so I knew that the weather was good up high. But what basically happened with me and my team of 8 climbers is that we waited a day after the first summit window. A mountain like Everest has lots of climbers, and a lot of the climbers get fairly impatient. They've been there for 6 weeks, 8 weeks away from home, and they all figure, hey, if I can go to the summit, I can just go home, great, right? And I can just, I'll be done with this expedition. And we said, well, hey, we'll wait an extra day, but what we're risking is the fact that we'll go up and we'll climb, this is the Lhotse face, and we'll get up to the high camp, and we will go for our summit attempt the day after everybody. But maybe the weather and the winds will move in and the weather window will close. So we're kind of risking some things, but nevertheless, our team chose to go up to the high camp, and this is a shot at 26,000 feet. And again, it's looking out kind of like you're in an airplane. And it's really windy in the South Col because it's kind of like a funnel. The winds funnel through this basin, kind of a pass or a saddle on the mountain. And you can see here all of the tents that are up there, and the winds pick up in the afternoon. And you generally get to the high camp at about noon. You eat lunch, you boil water, you make soup, you rest. You leave at 8 p.m. and you hike through the night. When you climb to the summit through the night, the goal is to get to the top around sunrise. And that's generally because the best weather is in the morning around sunrise. The last thing you want to do is be up there in the afternoon when it gets really windy and storms move in, and that's dangerous. And the day before us, about 200 people went for the top. And we said, well, yeah, if we avoid the crowds, it's probably a good thing. We'll just let them go up and come down. And as I was sitting in the tent in the high camp, I looked out at about 6:30, 7 p.m. and snapped this picture. And what you can see on the right side is you can see people in the photo. And I thought, this is kind of strange. Why are people going up right now? It's too early to leave for the summit. They're going to get up there in the dark. In reality, these people were on the way down still from the day before. And what happens to people is they begin to breathe bottled oxygen above this height. And when they're breathing bottled oxygen, they can run out. And if they run out, it's like a drug. Their body will crash. And so these people we ended up finding out later that a lot of them were in distress. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But as a team, there were 7 or 8 of us, and some of us climbers had a personal Sherpa to climb with. Myself, to save $20,000, I did not hire a personal Sherpa. I carried my own oxygen tanks, 2 of them in my backpack. Climbed on a low flow rate so that if my oxygen did run out, I wouldn't crash. And then I would change a bottle on the summit and then come back down. Now, this photo also shows in the upper right-hand corner on the ridge is our goal. Our goal is to get up to the ridge, which is right up in this area called the balcony. And we said, well, hey, as long as the weather allows us to get to the balcony, we can get up there as a group and we can decide if we're going to make it to the top. And so we did. We set out in the evening at about 8 p.m. and started climbing in the dark. And it was a slow process, but the winds picked up over the course of the night. There was lightning in the air, and it just didn't feel right. We did make it up to the balcony, and then that's kind of where things got interesting, up on that balcony. Oh, wrong video. You guys don't want to see the same video again.
Everest and tries to help out. He was climbing the world's largest mountain over the weekend when the harsh conditions killed at least 4 climbers nearby. Tonight, you'll hear his story only on Fox 32 Endeavor. Here's Jeremy Hubbard.
Well, Libby, here's where it happened. Approaching the summit of Everest along this ridge right here called the Death Zone. Here's a closer look right here. This one area is where dozens of climbers have died over the years. It was Sunday. Colorado mountaineer Jon Kedrowski was in this same area trying to get up to the mountain, to the summit, but another group was coming down, and the altitude and the wind and the frigid conditions proved too much for them.
This is Jon Kedrowski, Fox 31 Denver.
When the Avon native stood right here in the shadow of Everest before the climb, he knew the haunting sights he might face, but you can never quite prepare.
There's not a lot you can do for somebody that's dying and frozen to death.
Among the 4 climbers killed, this German doctor, this Canadian woman, and one man who was so disoriented by the altitude, he'd taken off his hat and gloves.
Basically was hallucinating, took his hat off, his gloves were thrown away. He kind of reached out to me kind of in a zombie-like fashion. At that point, there's not a lot you can do for somebody.
Kedrowski had been in constant contact about the weather on Everest with his best friend and our meteorologist, Chris Tomer.
So we went from about a 30-mile-an-hour wind to maybe 100-mile-per-hour. The jet stream just backed itself right over the summit, trapped everybody.
It is the kind of danger Colorado climber Alan Arnett is familiar with. He finally got to the top last year after 3 tries.
You don't know how your body's going to react. There's a number of things that just enter the equation that changes it all.
Right now, there are more than 300 climbers on Everest trying to take advantage of a small weather window in May to get to the top. And Kedrowski says he will try to reach the summit again in a few days, if it's safe.
I hope I get a chance to maybe go back up, but if I don't, I'm okay with, the fact that I was able to get through everything all right.
Now, a 5th climber is missing and believed dead. They're comparing what happened this weekend to May 10th, 1996, when 8 people caught in a snowstorm died on Everest. John Krakauer wrote the book Into Thin Air about that very day. Now, part of the problem this time, Libby, is that so many people are trying to get up to the top of Everest. We talked about this small weather window in May. They all take advantage of that. Kedrowski told us there were 150 people at one choke point yesterday trying to get up past there, and you're stuck in this one spot. You can't move at altitude, 26, 27, 28,000 feet. When you're in those conditions for hours on end, you're in real danger.
And they also said that part of the problem these days is that more and more people are trying to climb Mount Everest, and they're not necessarily capable of doing it.
There are 32 teams on Everest right now.
So yeah, there were a lot of people up there, and what we witnessed was, that evening, I was up near the top there. The top dot represents where I turned around. We met on the balcony though, which is actually near this other dot that's to the right side, kind of on this, what I call the ramp to the balcony. There were 7 of us together. 3 said, "This is too windy, we're going down." Me being like the wise one, I was like, "Oh, let's go across the ridge. I think we can keep going," right? Going across the ridge, this wind gust knocked me off my feet. I was luckily clipped into the rope, so it didn't knock me into Tibet. It kept me on the rope. As soon as I had that happen, we were basically right on that notch, right on the very top where that highest dot is. And I looked at 2 of my teammates and said, "We got to go turn around," and we did, and we jumped around on the rope and kept going, and I kept going down. Now I came across that I could come across a Canadian climber that had perished further down where the X's were. But, my priorities were, number 1, make sure you're okay. If you can help your teammates, obviously, make sure as a group we can get down. But then help others later if there are people that can be helped. So it was almost like a triage system, that there were people that had been up there since the day before. And this was why. You had all these people, it's like a crowded city sidewalk here in Minneapolis on a day where there's people all over the streets. And this was the day before a friend of mine shot this picture, and just too many people going up too late in the day. Then they got to the top. Then they got to the top at like 2 p.m. Then they were coming down. Oxygen ran out. It was a disaster. And so as a result, a lot of the ones that ran out of oxygen and didn't have a strong stamina passed out, couldn't be carried down. 7 people died. It was quite a harrowing experience. Now, later in the night, I made it down about 4 a.m. down into this flat area above the high camp, and this is where I then stopped because I realized, well, I got separated from people in my group, wanted to wait around and make sure people were okay. 2 or 3 of my teammates came stumbling down. We all got back to camp together. Then me and my friend David ended up dragging a Polish man from another expedition back to his tent because he couldn't walk. But he had been up there since the day before. So because we had only been up there through that night, a lot of us stamina-wise were okay, and the oxygen was still flowing for some people. I actually ended up giving my oxygen away for a couple of hours to Sandra, a woman on my team. Sandra had run out of oxygen. We found her face down on the snow, and she had passed out because of the lack of oxygen. So remember, again, there's only about 30% of the amount of oxygen there is at sea level when you're up there. So when you do get off of the bottle, if you've been breathing a high flow rate, oh, sorry about that. We don't want to hear that. When you're breathing a high flow rate and the oxygen gets cut off, your body crashes. And that's what we were seeing with a lot of people that were up there. And what I want to do is play for you the last 5 minutes of Dateline, because this is where it got difficult. We were up there at the high camp, and we started to climb down. We went back to base camp. We thought our expedition was over. Okay, we're not going to make the summit. It's going to be a failure. It's over. We have no chance. And I got back down to base camp and had second thoughts and second feelings, because not only had I done this project, sleeping on the summits, where I camped up on all the summits, and I was going after the mountains day after day after day, and had trained so hard for this, but also I had people at home that believed in me. And so I refused to give up on it. I thought, you know what, there's got to be a chance to go back up. And there was a silver lining. Chris Tomer, my good friend, told me that the weather was going to be good in 4 days. And so, hey, he said, I believe you're strong enough to go back up. And my parents talked to me on the phone, and they said, hey, I think you're strong enough to go up too. And so this last about 5-6 minute clip on Dateline, a documentary we did about this project, really kind of talks about the end story and what we ended up doing.
And the Canadian climber Sharia Shaw had not returned to Camp 4 with the rest of her party. There were many other climbers in Sharia's predicament that day. Down in base camp, Grayson Schaefer said it looked like a war zone.
The high altitude helicopters that they use are basically just doing laps.
Choppers were soaring up the mountain, carrying sick climbers down to the Everest emergency room.
I counted at least 10 helicopter flights.
At base camp, everyone was most worried about the climbers who hadn't been rescued.
They know that a number of climbers still haven't checked in, so they know that something terrible has happened, but they don't know the full extent of it.
The next day, May 21st, Jon Kedrowski and Sandra LeDuc limped back to base camp, shell-shocked by what they'd seen in the death zone, realizing many climbers weren't going to come home. What's more, they were deflated that Everest had beaten them.
Different teams had huge congratulations signs up, and that was painful. That was hitting me hard about the fact that we hadn't summited.
Jon Kedrowski says he too felt the agony of defeat. But just as he was packing up to go home, Kedrowski says a Sherpa on his team named Zhang Bu, one of the most experienced on the mountain, came to his tent with an audacious idea.
And he goes, I want to go back up because I've climbed Everest 11 times and I've never been turned away from an Everest summit before. And, you know, it would be like if LeBron James came and asked you to play horse, would you say no? You know? And I felt like, sure, I'm going to do it.
It turns out Sandra LeDuc was also having a change of heart.
It just felt very wrong. I turned to my team leader and I said, I think I want to go back up.
So despite having seen death on the mountain and nearly dying themselves, LeDuc, Kedrowski, and most of their team decided to give it another try. At 3 in the morning on May 24th, they set out again, grimly determined to get through the icefall before the sun made it even more dangerous.
Now, a few hours of this, and then it's going to melt, but if we get up and out of here by like 9 or 10, we'll be fine.
They kept climbing all day, past Camp 1, sleeping at Camp 2, pushing through Camp 3, and arriving at Camp 4 on the afternoon of May 25th. They had climbed 1.5 vertical miles in little more than a day.
About 11 a.m. The weather's good. There's Everest in the south summit. There's the route.
As darkness fell that evening, Kedrowski and his Sherpa, Zhang Bu, steeled themselves for one last all-or-nothing push to the summit.
It's almost 8 p.m. here in the South Col. 25th of May, light winds. We're about to head up Everest. We're going to leave in a few minutes. Can't wait to get up there.
Jon Kedrowski and his Sherpa, setting their own pace with no crowds to slow them down, sped towards the summit. In less than 8 hours, Kedrowski would realize his boyhood dream.
I summited at 3:30 in the morning, which was too early.
Couldn't take the picture.
No, but I got pictures in the dark and a little video.
Summit of Mount Everest. 29,028 feet, 8850 meters.
The amazing speed with which he and his Sherpa had scaled the heights of Everest had left them with more than enough oxygen to wait on the summit long enough to see a spectacular sunrise.
This is it, folks, the top of the world.
At about 6 a.m., Sandra Leduc and the others reached the summit too.
I got very emotional. This is the moment I've been dreaming of for 12 years.
Janko and I just summited, and I'm tired, but I'm hanging in there. My goal is to get down to Camp 2.
They were still feeling the elation of having summited Mount Everest as they left. But just a few hundred yards down the mountain, they came upon a body, still clipped to the rope line. Red suit, yellow boots, and a Canadian flag. It was Sharia Shah.
When I went up and I saw the Canadian flag, I felt sick. And then when I came down, then I wanted to cry.
Both times in passing her, stopped for a moment, just paid some respects and said, you know, the mountain does make the decisions, and then I continued on.
It turns out.
So, you know, the reality of people dying up there is very true, and, you know, obviously I don't want to dwell on that part of it. More or less the success of going back up, never giving up on that. You know, and that was kind of the decision. Again, the reality of it's there. Has anyone read the book Into Thin Air? Jon Krakauer. It's a classic from back in the 90s when the first major tragedy happened on Everest, and Scott Fisher's body's still up there. And for me, seeing that was kind of pretty earth-shattering, because I had read that book, and to be a part of that history was impressive. But more, you know, getting back up there to the top, seeing that sunrise, and again, it was like the 2 or 3 days a year that you get no wind on the summit. So it was just an honor to be standing up there. I felt so lucky to be up there and get the views back down towards base camp and the morning light and the alpenglow and the pyramid from the shadow of the sunrise as it comes up. We stayed on the summit for almost 2 hours because we'd made it up early enough and had plenty of oxygen left to sit there, and then let some of the teammates come up, and we all you know, were rewarded with that beautiful view in the morning. And you know, so achieving your goals is never going to be easy. If doing something great was easy, then everybody would be doing it and there'd be no reward for doing it. So take that thought with you. And then again on Everest, everybody was doing it up there. It was pretty crowded. But maybe not quite as much on that day than on the other days. But it was still a great reward, and facing adversity, making it through. But always remember, you're on that summit, and then guess what? You're going to see all these other summits and all these other mountains, and you have to go out and do new things. And a lot of people ask me, well, you know, you climbed Everest, it's over. You're going to retire now, huh? Or you've accomplished your Super Bowl ring or your championship. And I'm like, well, yeah, I did, but I've got other goals and other dreams. And I'm, in fact, working on the sequel to my current book called Sleeping on the Summits 2. And I went out this past spring and I spent the night on, well, in a few instances, I've been already to the California 14ers to spend the night on the 14,000-foot peaks in the Sierras of California. And then I went and climbed and skied the 20 highest volcanoes in 30 days out in the Pacific Northwest. And it was just an amazing ski tour. We went up and I spent the night on Mount Shasta, for example, and Mount Rainier, and I skied off of Mount Baker, and just the skiing and the camaraderie I had with friends that joined me, and the sunsets were just something that I'll never forget. But I'm always coming up with new ideas and new Everests to climb, basically. I went to Pakistan last year and climbed and skied from Gasherbrum 2, which is one of the 14 highest mountains in the world. A good friend of mine just 3 days ago stood on top of K2, the second highest mountain in the world, which is considered much more difficult than Everest. He became the oldest American to summit K2. And that was, he's 58 years old, and he summited K2, so that was incredible. And now I've been getting phone calls from people saying, when are you going to go do it? So I already have these goals, new goals I have to set, new mountains to climb. So I really appreciate your time today, and always remember to enjoy that journey along the way. And I'm going to close with kind of a fun video with some music and a little bit about my book again, because it's always fun to be out there climbing these mountains.
Most unbelievable journey of my entire life. This is what true Colorado's all about right here. Meteorologist Chris Tomer, ladies and gentlemen.
Peak 45 of the adventure. This is number 8 out of all the 14ers that I'm going to do this summer and camp on the summit.
It's kind of taking the 14ers to the next level.
Sunrise, official sunrise on top of Long's Peak. Find the motivation and just move up the mountain.
What do you think it's going to get down to tonight, Chris? Freezing? 38 maybe? I'm going to bivvy right here on the summit, right on the summit block. This is why I did this project, that's for sure. This is Peak 47. Gorgeous views.
We're teeter-tottering between kind of the monsoon and these cold fronts that are moving in.
I'm on the summit of number 50, Kit Carson. This area clearly got struck by lightning last night. It was a freak storm.
You had to go as fast as we could to make the sunset, because that's one of the rules. We had to just go as fast as we could with all this gear to make the summit sunset.
Gotta get the tent up fast on the summit, the capital. Peak 45 of all the 14ers. We're gonna pack up and do the traverse, which we're just about to see over here. Gosh, it feels great to get this one out of the way. Woo! This is it. The sun is literally going down on my Bivvies project. 14,005 feet. Thanks for tuning in.
So I'm wondering, some of y'all might have some questions or anything. Does anybody have any questions at all? Yes, sir.
I've got a million. Why are you crazy?
In the back.
What kind of time management goes into something like this, where you're having to climb the peak, you've got a 2-day span here, but you're also to make that climb, it's 45 days to the top or whatever it may have been. What kind of time management? How strict are you on that?
Are you referring more to the projects I do here in the U.S. or the bigger peaks that are higher?
It seemed like Everest had a few more things to it that were pretty critical, like with oxygen, stuff like that. So more, I guess, with Everest, it kind of came about that question, but just in general.
Yeah. In general, yeah, there's a lot of planning that goes into it. I guess I could answer it in 2 parts. In Colorado, having climbed a lot of the peaks, I had a detailed log of some of the mountains and knew how long it would take me to summit if it was good weather and things like that. So then I could time my leaving to minimize my time on the summit, to minimize my risk of being on these ridges during dangerous times during the day. So that's one part of the time management. When you climb on an expedition like Nepal and Everest, they've been doing it now pretty consistently for the last 30, 40 years, to where, every year in May, from about May 10th to May 25th or 28th, there's a couple good weather windows to do your summit. So you try to get there in April to acclimatize in time. And when you're climbing the lower camps, the weather's not as critical. It's just getting the right weather window and deciding to go up by the end of the expedition when you need good weather and no wind. And even that is not an exact science. It's been really fascinating for Chris to work with me on these things, because he is a mountaineer, but he's at home and he's on all these fancy computer models. And even then, there's been times I'll be up on near a summit. It happened in Pakistan last year. And I'll call him on the phone and I'm like, man, it's blowing 40 miles an hour. I can't go up, it's too dangerous. And he's like, what? He's like, it looks like it's fine to me. And so it's a complete and exact science. But some of the routines and some of the things that we do can definitely, we learn them over time and figure out ways to do them in terms of time management. Yeah.
I'm sure it relates to Everest too, because I've kind of been fascinated by that. The desire to climb Everest. Talk a little bit about how dangerous of a situation it is with all these people that have spent so much money and so much time, and how you had to rely on your experience, I'm sure, to make a very calculated decision to go back up, knowing full well that several people have died and that all the people around you and just the feeling that it was to get to Everest at the top, knowing that you had to go back up and you were that close to not doing it.
Yeah, the turning around the first time and failing was somewhat of a hard decision, but in all honesty, at the moment it wasn't, because the wind was just destroying you and it was such bad weather. So that part of it was actually easy to decide. But for me, now being on 15 of these bigger expeditions, how many of you guys are patient? How many of you guys want it now? Right? We all want it now. We want to, we pull our phones out. We want to get on the Facebook. We want to get on the email. We want to have it right now. I think what I've learned over these years now, and I'm not that old, but on 15 expeditions, you really learn how to be patient. And even on Everest, you realize the first summit window is always going to be everyone wants to go. And when I go back and I started researching the historical records on Everest and when people were summiting, and I found that every year after about the 21st of May, there's always a second or even third really good weather window. And I had that knowledge to my advantage, even though it was my first time on Everest in 2012, that I knew that even if we let that first weather window go, or even if we went at the end of the window, if it didn't work out, that there probably would be another window. And so that was kind of gave me a peace of mind to realize that we could wait. So I think it was just, being patient. And on all these, if you're patient, it usually pays off. Yeah.
Your whole experience is incredible. I'm just kind of curious, what do you do for 2 hours at the top of Everest?
Man, it was a blur, honestly. But it was taking pictures. It was enjoying the view. I had another close friend of mine who I do the basketball camps with back home. His grandfather's ashes, I had in a little vial, and I sprinkled those on the top. Took out my prayer flags and just said a few words. And I had a list of friends and family that I wanted to thank. So I didn't film me thanking them, but I read over their names and just kind of thought about that. And I really just enjoyed the views. I drank some water, shot that video, shot a little bit more video as well when it got light. And it's weird, when you're at high altitude, time goes really fast. You'd be surprised. But yeah, and then it was kind of watching for the others coming up and figuring out a window. Because even on that last summit attempt, there was 45 people at the end of the season. So I was like, okay, I still was paranoid that, oh my gosh, there's going to be lines. So we were trying to assess, okay, when so-and-so people make it up here, when can we sneak down and get out of here to where we don't have to wait longer to get out? So yeah, so it was an odd thing. Believe it or not, time goes really fast. The summit is from the podium to me, and then it's kind of in a triangular shape, and then there's a cornice up there, and it drops off on all sides. But it's just a really small little area, and I kind of stood right on the top, and I was like, holy smokes, this is it, the highest spot on Earth. And it was just kind of unique, It had that moment, so.
Did you intentionally save Holy Cross for your final mountain on the Colorado project?
I did.
Any significance there?
That it was closest to my house. Yeah. And it was, I kind of strategically planned the peaks of the watch range. And you'll see, that's the other thing we'll do in a minute. We'll give a copy of this away. But it's organized by chapter. And I set it up so at the end in the fall, when the weather's a little bit more suspect and there's more snow, the peaks closer to my house get a little easier. And then I kind of did a bunch of them on the way home at the end of it. And so, it was kind of a convenient thing. So, yeah. But the Holy Cross, is definitely a beautiful mountain and a great place to finish it. So.
How fast do you normally do one of the 14ers?
Some of the easier ones, I can trail run them in an hour. We do trail runs on them. Some of the more difficult ones take several hours, 5, 6, 7 hours. Yeah, and then it depends on the time of year. Now I love going out and skiing them. So when you'll skin up which is amazing though. I started skiing them 5, 6, 7 years ago more. I skied them some younger, but not as much, because you can climb for let's say 7 hours, and it's a battle. But then you can ski down to your car in 30 minutes, and it's amazing. You get to your car and you look up and you're like, holy smokes, I was way up there, and then you're heading to the pub after that. So, yeah. So they're a lot of fun.
Do you actually sleep when you're up there?
Yeah, I was so tired after a while, and my body did get acclimated. For those of you that may have come to Colorado in the past and you've maybe hiked these, or even if you've come to ski, you maybe get a headache or you can't sleep at night. That's just the body's normal acute mountain sickness reaction to altitude and lack of oxygen. Once the body adjusts after several days, and I was so tired from climbing these things, then I did just fine, and that kind of brings me to this last slide. I do private trips too, so if you're ever interested in that sort of thing, I've left my bookmarks out. There's some business cards. Please grab one. If you're intrigued by the mountains, if you just some of you may have just a dream to do something that's outside of the box, shoot me an email. I try to get back to everybody on email, that sort of thing. I didn't sneak a picture in there from Kilimanjaro. I just got back from Kilimanjaro. We got 12 people to the summit of the highest point in Africa. And we did a safari for 3 days. I'll be doing that trip again next year. And I've already got several people interested in signing up for that, but it's a really fun trip. That trip will change your life. I mean, anybody can hike that mountain. It's an amazing experience. The views are incredible.
How do you define anyone?
With a good level of fitness, it's a hike. And so it's what I call glamping. We hike through like 4 to 6 hours a day to a camp. We have dining tents, a cook. They set your tents up for you. They carry your backpack for you. It's a good service. And then you get to the camp, you relax, you enjoy, you play cards, you enjoy the views, you take pictures. It's on a lot of people's bucket lists now. And so that also reminds me, when you do walk out, if you're interested, I do a monthly newsletter. And so I sign people up, and I just send a once a month newsletter out that has like these news stories that we air on TV, and you can watch them if you maybe need some inspiration in your everyday life. You can click on those and watch them. Or I have just information about the last month of things that I did, or highlight like the Kilimanjaro trip, and I show pictures from that and things like that. So just your name and your email, and I just send one update a month out. So maybe we could start passing that around if anyone's interested in signing up for that. But yeah, these are all kind of the things that I do. And are there any other quick questions? I don't know if you guys are on a time crunch.
Everest again?
Funny you asked that. Yes, I do, because there's another route I want to try, but also I'm intrigued by this oxygen thing. There's very few people that climb it without oxygen, and I would like to maybe try it, to be honest. Just another kind of goal or challenge, but we'll see. It's kind of an unknown for sure.
Okay. So do you have like a wife? Does she like you?
That's interesting you said that. Does she let you? Well, I don't know if it would come down to being let or anything. No, I moved back to Colorado a few years ago to be closer to my family. I was living kind of everywhere for my grad school days, and in Washington State as a professor, and I recently moved back to Colorado like 2 years ago full time, because I was spending so much time going back visiting my parents, my brothers, nephews, things like that. No, but eventually I think I'll have somebody. I think I'll have somebody eventually. We'll see, and they'll let me, right?